welcome everybody to Esports Ed number 3. Previously, the Bytespeed podcast, all about esports and building out your programs, now kind of transformed into a webinar series, doing a little bit of a deeper dive into some of the day-to-day functions of esports programs. We've done stuff on shoutcasting and running production. Last month, we did a great session on how to run productive practices, and the current iteration, this month's topic is how to utilize film and go through analytics. So we're really excited to have a good group here to talk about this topic. Introducing our panelists here, myself, Josh Knutson, I'm the Esports and VR Solutions Director over at Bytespeed. We're an IT solutions company based in Moorhead, Minnesota. We've worked with a number of different high school and college esports programs across the country, getting hardware into their facilities and also serving as a resource to kind of help get started and get the resources they need to, get off the ground and be successful. The other two people that we have on the panel tonight, I'll let kind of introduce themselves. First up is Michael Drones from Drury University.
How's it going, everyone? As Josh said, my name is Michael Jones. I'm the head coach of the varsity esports program at Drury University in Springfield, Missouri.
And then last but certainly not least, we have Brock Frazier.
Hello, everybody. Brock Frazier, Massac County, down in Southern Illinois. Kind of started one of the first esports teams as far as high school goes in the area, and been trying to help, get the word out and get more students involved and make it a very positive impact.
Awesome. Thanks so much to both of you for volunteering your Wednesday night to be with us. We are really excited to kind of dive in a little bit more on this topic and other stuff that we have coming up in the future months. But tonight, what we're going to talk about and the different topics for this evening, we're going to go through a real quick overview on some analytics. I'm going to take you through a walkthrough scenario that I used for actually a webinar that we did for the state of Illinois back in like March or April. Just kind of a real quick highlight on using stats for practical uses, scouting and kind of preparing for a game. And then also we're going to talk a lot about VOD review, different tools. How do you actually run a VOD? We'll get, input from Brock and Michael, guys that are doing this every day and helping out their students at the high school and the college level. So, of course, there will be a Q&A session at the end. We're going to shoot for an hour. If this is like any of the other previous Esports Ed webinars, it'll probably be like an hour and a half. We'll see what happens. But please, if you have any questions, throughout the webinar, please feel free to use the Q&A function or type them in the chat. We'd love to have a back and forth with you. This is really about getting your questions answered and providing meaningful content for the community to be able to use, especially for, the newer coaches and newer directors that are just getting started. Before we get into kind of the analytics side of things, I'd love to get kind of just an overview of like what Brock and Michael, what do you guys actually use on a day-to-day basis? There's a ton of different stat websites out there. We've got a couple on the screen, but in your daily interactions with your students and your student athletes, what tools are you using on the analytics side?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll go first. First of all, can everyone hear me? I just want to make sure I don't see my little box lighting up green, so.
You sound good to me.
Okay, cool. I just want to make sure that I'm coming through with the participants. So if you hear a bunch of silence for the next like 30 seconds, just post and I'll double check it. But I think I'm good. So great question. You've listed a lot of the main ones here. op.gg is sort of my main resource for League of Legends in terms of scouting other teams. That's kind of the gold standard that every team uses in terms of sharing their team's information. If you're setting up a scrim, it's just good practice to give a multi-op.gg link, which is simple as typing in your players' summoner names with commas in between them. And that'll give you one whole view of everyone's summoner profile. And I think we're going to get more in depth into that, so I won't explain every nook and cranny of op.gg, but that's kind of my go-to day-to-day thing. There's some other stuff I'm going to cover specifically for capturing my players' comms out of Discord, as well as a tool called Insights, which you could theoretically accomplish with a bunch of different software tools. This one just brings them all into sort of a unified place. And especially this year with COVID-19 and not always having the luxury to have everyone in the room at the same time for an in-person VOD review, it allows us to do that review asynchronously and post comments that students can then go look at later and add to the conversation. And that's really helpful because that's basically what they're doing in class anyway, is a lot of asynchronous learning and forum posting and whatnot. So it's right up their alley.
Yeah, so very similar on mine. OPGG is definitely one that stands out. It really depends on the game that we're participating in. But as far as League of Legends go, we utilize Face Check, Pro Guides, OPGG. Trying to think what the other one is. There's Mobalytics. That's another app that you can use, as well as just getting on and checking people's summoners' names and things like that. And then Overwatch, we definitely use like Overbuff. I recognize that one on there. And then there's another one, Stat Banana. It is a paid platform, but usually if one person has it, you can share the link to it, and then you can go in and there's overview of the maps, and you can kind of draw in there and map strategies out and things like that. Similar to what you do in traditional sports and things like that. But yeah, very very similar apps and things that are listed there. Just every little bit of information you can pull together, especially before you do a VOD review or things like that. And I need to get a little more into capturing outside of Discord, as he mentioned, but we usually just kind of listen in and record that and kind of review, the positive things and the critical thinking and the team leading and things like that, and go over that and how we can build as a whole.
Yeah, absolutely. Great sources of information. Certainly the 4 examples that we have on the screen are not the end all be all. There are tons and tons of stat websites or other resources that are online and available to grab, either free or, for a small fee. Like Brock said, Stat Banana is awesome for Overwatch. I use those when I coached my team at University of Jamestown. hsreplay.net, if your schools have Hearthstone teams, is I think the best $60 you can spend for the year. That's a huge, collection of data that you can comb through and use every single day at practice, whether it be a League of Legends game, Overwatch, or what have you. So if you're looking for other sites, start with these that are on the page here, and then a quick Google search will help find some of those other sites, and we'll kind of go through how you actually use that data here in a second. But the long story is that there's a lot of different opportunities to gather data out there. A lot of these sites do the same thing. So if you look and find a site that fits for you and has all the info that you're looking for, it's great to kind of dive in a little deeper and start looking at the data from a more microscopic level. And also one thing that I want to point out before we get into the example is that using results and scores from your opponent's previous games or even your games is another great way to get really good data, really good stats to be able to look back on and see, the story of the game and kind of see what went right, what went wrong from a very numerical standpoint. So we'll look at scores here in a second, but it's a great way to help understand your own tendencies, your opponent's tendencies over the course of a season, and we'll kind of jump in with an example here. So what I did back in March, actually, was during the College League of Legends season, I actually pulled some data from the Big East Conference and kind of explaining out how you would go about pulling relevant data for, a scouting report. And I think, the best way to really show everyone kind of how you use analytics and how you use some of these tools is to go through an example just like this. So at the time I pulled this, it was kind of in thinking that, okay, St. John's University is going to play DePaul. They're going to be, playing League of Legends against each other in the Big East Conference championship game. So in thinking that us tonight are St. John's University, we're scouting DePaul, that's kind of the mindset that you should be in as far as going through this example. And this is something that you can do for any game that you have, kind of a good platform that has scores, results, and then using those online tools that we talked about. Doesn't matter if it's high school or college or anything in between. So let's dive in here. If you have questions or things you want explained a little bit more, please feel free to let us know, and we can kind of dive in a little deeper with Brock and Michael. So first off, a great way to start out your scouting report looking for analytics is to look at the roster of who you're playing. This will help for, finding those op.ggs that we'll show in a second. You're going to want to know the in-game username of the opposing team. So we went through, we found DePaul's roster right on the team's page within Battlefy where they house the tournament. And we can actually find their starting five plus their substitute that was listed. So we took all of these usernames, went over to op.gg, and actually plugged them in to their search bar. op.gg, u.gg, a lot of those other League of Legends style tools will pull similar results to what you're seeing on the screen. And there's a couple of things that I want to highlight just as things that you can see from a very data-driven perspective. op.gg uses a lot of solo queue data, so it's not a one-to-one example of what the other team is doing in a competitive season as a 5-stack playing against a game. But this is a great tool to find out, what are they playing in their, in their solo queue time? What are they putting work into, average skill level, and some of the other metrics that we look at from a very high level for esports. For Brock and Michael, we'll get to kind of the highlighted stuff that I have on the screen here for the example, but when you guys are pulling out reports like this for scouting, what are the things that you guys are looking for in an op.gg? Brock, do you want to start us off here?
Yeah, sure. Well, first thing, you pulling this up, I immediately started looking at their win rates on certain champions, their main roles. So we would scout this, especially for band picks. We want to kind of also look at as a whole of, we've got a Silas, was that 67% win rate, but a Kiana's got 100% win rate. What is the play rate to that win ratio, and break that down? So, and then you add okay, we got Morgana Stun down there with a Kaisa, AD carry. What is that going to adapt their team to do? So then we can kind of start looking at the whole of the map and kind of see how early game, laning phase, and all that will kind of play together. And we can kind of anticipate maybe what their jungler's doing, where they're going to look to gank and things like that. So all these stats can be compiled into kind of a game-winning strategy, or at least a defensive one, going against a team that, could be even better. I tell you now, none of our guys are ranked, Diamond 2 and things like that. We're rebuilding our league team right now with we got quite a few freshmen that came in, but yeah, I would definitely be looking at a defensive. What can we do to sway that game over? We got to prioritize, objectives, dragons, things like that, and kind of overcome them. And these stats would help us kind of, at least get that on paper, to then move on to maybe a chalk talk or something like that, dry erase talk, whatever you want to call it. But, and then we can kind of get, into the details of it. But that's the first thing I started looking at as soon as you pulled it up.
Sure. Michael, what do you look for when you pull up, these op.gg lists for teams that you're scouting or kind of planning for?
Ooh. Yeah, I've been thinking since you posed the question about how to answer this as succinctly as possible, because I'm looking at a lot of things. This is going to depend a lot on the particular meta. So if I have to step back in time to the state of League of Legends at the time the screenshot was taken, my answer might be a little bit differently now on this, different now on the specifics. But generally, I am looking to see what their best champions are, what they're most likely to play. I think you have another slide where you'll show sort of what their picks were in other matches that they've actually played, actual competitive matches, because one thing to keep in mind is that this is just what people play in solo queue. So their jungler is most played on Lee Sin. You might bust that out in a competitive game, but maybe that doesn't necessarily work with what their team tends to do, right? Maybe they tend to play around another lane and they want their jungler on tank. So while he's an avid Lee Sin player, it might not be something that is in play for our particular matchup. There are so many variables, especially if we're just talking specifically about League of Legends, We're looking to take away things that they're going to be really good at, that are strong in the meta, and that we don't play, and or that would directly counter the general game plan that we're going to have. Now, it's almost impossible to say, we're going to go into this game and play aggressive. You can draft around that, but you always have to adjust to what they're doing, because like there are certain meta warping champions. So if you're watching Worlds right now, like Lilia is one of those champions. If you're on blue side and you don't want to play Lilia, then you have to ban it. Because you don't want to give it to them on red side, right? It's a perpetual red side ban, because everyone's assuming it's one of the best champions in the game and someone's going to play it if they have the opportunity. But maybe you're not super comfortable on that champion and you don't want to see it played at all. So you might have to ban that on blue side. If you don't ban it, or another expected ban doesn't come through, then that warps the whole priority of the draft. And there's so many other factors. We could get really deep into League of Legends specific stuff, but a lot of it has to do with like, if this, then that, if this, then that. Like, it's a big logical statement of, if this champion is up, they're going to pick it, and then we're going to be able to pick this other champion that would deal with it, and then they'll do this, and then we'll do that. But if you get trapped in that rabbit hole too much, you'll go down sort of a set of logical conclusions where, oh, that makes sense. This champion is good into that champion. But then at the end of the draft, you look at your whole team comp and go, it's not really that functional in and of itself. We just tried to like counterpick every lane, and now our comp doesn't have an identity or like a clear style it has to play around. So you have to kind of balance all of those factors. Maybe their ideal team comp is something that we're not good at dealing with, so we're just going to take away the mate. Like, maybe they're really good at front to back team fighting, so we're going to take away their premier scaling AD carry and the best tank in the game, whereas another team might like to split push a lot and play like a 1-3-1 style, so we're going to ban a lot of the top laners. Especially at the high school level, one final comment here, at the collegiate level, this is a fairly average roster. I'd say the top 100, 150 teams or more in the country have a roster that looks like this, all diamond plus players. But at the high school level, very possible that one week you'll face a team that's like bronze, gold, silver, diamond, right? In that case, everything I just said does not matter. Just ban the top 3 champions that that diamond player plays, force them to be on something they're not comfortable on, right? Like, a lot of the assumptions in draft on what is good and what you have to ban and what counters what is built on the idea that the person piloting that champion is going to do so optimally, right? So-and-so counters this other champion in this matchup. Well, yeah, assuming that that player is good enough to execute it. If I'm the better player, it doesn't matter what we play. I'm just going to outskill you. So that's another factor you have to keep in mind, is like the skill levels of the teams. And yeah, I could talk about this for hours. There's too many factors, especially in League of Legends in particular. So
yeah, so going with the example and kind of just before we move to the next slide here, a couple of things from a very like basic level of looking at this roster for DePaul. You know, we're looking at skill level across the board, champions that they've played in solo queue, that's kind of like their comfort or what they're working on. And I highlighted the ADC here because in season 9, they were Grandmaster. They're Diamond 1 in season 10 when this screenshot was taken. So, you know, solo queue ranks fluctuate a bunch. But it's a good kind of look at, okay, this is probably their best player. Then we can kind of think, okay, do we want to target ban, like Michael was saying, and take away a couple of those key champions? Or do we want to shift our ban strategy towards some of the other players and kind of adjust, like Brock was saying, kind of adjusting the game plan as you go through, you know, some of these different play rates and win rates and looking across the board. I highlighted the Kaisa and Misfortune for the ADC because of the win rate difference. You know, you see 10 games played with a 90% win ratio. Chances are that's probably something he's pretty comfortable on and has been doing very well with. The Misfortune, 6 games played, only 17% win rate, maybe not so much. So that's other things that you can start thinking of and being able to look through all of these stats. We did have something come up in the chat from Luis. That's a heck of a lot more info gleaned than I would have thought. Will you be doing Overwatch? So we don't have Overwatch loaded up for tonight, but we can definitely, you know, if you're interested in kind of combing through some of that information, we'd love to connect afterwards and kind of, you know, go through those steps as well. If we tried to do more than one game, we'd be here till like midnight.
Josh, just a quick point on that for Overwatch, just so we
Yeah.
can take something away from this as it relates specifically to that game. Obviously, that game doesn't have bans, so a lot of the stuff that we just discussed isn't as important. You're going to look at just general stats to see what they're better at, so you know what kind of comp to practice, because you get to play whatever you want, unless you're playing in a league that has hero pools or something weird like that. But otherwise, yeah, you could look at an individual player's profile and go like, man, he's like really good at Reinhardt, not so good at Winston, so they're probably going to play more of a grouped together death ball front to back, a more team fight style composition, where if they're really good at Winston and their DPS player is really good at Tracer, you're going to get dove. And so you need to prepare a counter strategy for that. So there are still some of these elements, but without that pick ban phase, which is like the high stakes chess match that the coaches play against each other at the start of the game, that isn't present in Overwatch. So
Great. Brock, anything to add there for Overwatch?
I was going to mention that, he's spot on with the bans, with not being in there with Overwatch. But the good thing with, like we showed earlier with Overbuff, you can look them up individually and see their win rates and their statistics on each, champion and, things that like they're playing. And like he was saying, you can kind of look at what meta they may be playing with Death Ball and, old goats and things like that. But yeah, you can still analyze that just in a different way to the mechanic of that game, but the ban thing really, like he said perfectly, it is like a high stakes chess match right at the beginning, throwing all the information that you can gather, at the other team. So
sure. Okay, so moving on through the example here, match history is where the next kind of step in the scouting process would look. When I pulled this out, there had been 7 games throughout the Collegiate League of Legends season that we could actually get data from. We went through and I actually just looked at all of DePaul's matches, pulled some screenshots, and looked for commonalities in the games that they actually played during the season. So this is going to be a super valuable area where you can actually start to look at patterns of, the team playing together, as opposed to, something like solo queue where guys are trying new things or just kind of jamming one champion for 10 games in a row to put in practice. Games that, have meaning to them, where the team is drafting together as a 5-stack with a coach and they're actually trying to, put forth a strategy that they've practiced and want to carry out throughout the season. So some of the things that we looked at, their top laner for DePaul played Sett 6 out of the 7 games. So that tells us a couple of things, either one, super comfortable pick for them. One, it could be, that Sett was really strong in the meta at that point. And something that, like Michael was saying, it's a must-have pick. So, it's probably going to show up in every game, and DePaul might have been like, well, we want it for sure, so we're going to pick it. The ADC we played Kaisa 3 out of 7 times. If we remember back from the slide before, that was the 90% win rate in solo queue. So they're trying, to play out that really strong champion for them in solo queue. They're playing it in a team comp for their regular season. And then mid, the last kind of big common thing that we saw, played Azir 3 out of the 7 times. So that was kind of another, area where, okay, we're starting to see this pop up more often than something like a Blitzcrank that only got played once. So this is where you can kind of, with the stats that you have from op.gg, and then the, the match history and some of the different actual compositions that got played, you can start to formulate that pick ban strategy and kind of pull all of that together and start coming up with, okay, we want to go about, doing our draft in a way where we're going to take some of these picks away, or we're going to focus in on one, strength or weakness of their team or our team. Brock, Michael, anything to add here with kind of using match history? We'll get into like actual match stats here in a second, but just from a pure comp standpoint and kind of looking at some of these commonalities.
Yeah, I would jump in. The obvious immediate trend is that they favor Sett in the top lane. I would love to see, I don't know if this platform had it specifically, but a lot of platforms like Battlefy, you can look and not just see what they picked, but how they drafted. So the order in which they picked those champions is very important, because they played Sett every game. Is that because they first picked it early, or because it was just a comfortable thing they could take that was always open? That can lead to a bit of an issue, because teams will often use a third-party software, something like ProDraft, to do the draft. And then when they go into game, they might not. They're almost surely not going to draft in the same order. Like when it comes to them, they're just going to pick the champion that they're playing, not the champion that they picked second in the draft. So if the website here in question being Battlefy pulls that draft information through the API, it might not give you the full picture. So that's very important to think about. I would say if you're going to run a league or if you're a part of league ops, it would be great to, if teams are using ProDraft, which they should because most players don't have all champions and you need all champions to do a draft properly and have all of the options available to you, would be to require screenshots taken of draft, because that's all very important information that should be publicly accessible information to everyone in the tournament. So you know how to kind of plan around that. So what I'm seeing is they play Sett every game. So I'm either going to prepare a specific counter matchup. We're going to wait for them to pick Sett and then counter pick it with something weird that we would otherwise not normally play or is not considered good in the meta. But it's good for us because our player is good at it and it's good against Sett, right? So those are your two options. You can either counter pick it or just ban it. The third option is like a bit of hubris, but saying we will be better than the other teams that they beat with Sett, and we will have a better strategy to execute around it. So either way, you know that that's kind of a commonality. And if it's not Sett, you take Sett off the board. Well, what's their next best option going to be? They're probably not going to totally pivot to something completely different and play like, I don't know, Quinn, right? They're going to look for another bruiser or tank that has CC that can roam around with their jungler. Because what else am I seeing? In those three matches, they've played Olaf, Jarvan, Elise, all junglers with decent CC and or sort of pressure potential. Same thing around the mid lane. 2 Azir games. Azir can push pretty quickly. That gives him lane priority to roam out into the river. So they tend to pick very aggressive top halves of the map, top jungle and mid, so that they can control the river, they can control neutral objectives, they can invade into the enemy jungle, and their bot sides tend to be relatively safe. They have a Yuumi, a Nautilus, and a Blitzcrank. Of those, Blitzcrank is probably the most aggressive. But yeah, like Xayah, Nautilus, and Ezreal Yuumi are kind of two of the safest sort of weak side lanes. What do I mean by that? You can't, unless you're just very much better than everyone else in the other team, you can't afford to pressure everywhere because then all of your lanes are pushing and one of them will get ganked, right? So you have to kind of pick a side of the map, ideally, and especially if you're on like red side and you're guaranteed counter pick, you can say, our mid laner is better, so we're going to make sure that we have a favorable matchup for them so we have a winning lane to play around. I think these are very smart drafts in terms of putting together their overall team composition from DePaul because they have a clear identity, right? They have a very strong top side of the map that's going to be aggressive. The bot side is going to intentionally play farther back and more defensive and not take as many resources. And they're going to scale into the late game and just show up with a strong sort of frontline engage package from the other 3 members of the team.
Awesome. Brock, anything else to add for this one?
I mean, the only thing I immediately started looking at was what caused them the loss out of the 3-game, streak here. And I'm looking at, yeah, they had Sett all 3 games. They did have Azir the first 2. They switched that mid lane pick. What is that win ratio or that shutdown ratio between that Graves jungle and that Aatrox top? Did that cause that Sett to have a bad game that time? Did they maybe pick on mid lane between Graves and, Syndra? I also see that game went a little bit longer. So you look at their death ratio on the first 2 games, it's 13-3, and then all of a sudden it jumps to 23. So I would think that maybe they really picked the weak point and focused on that and maybe tried to shut Sett down and keep him out of the ganking or maybe snowballing in or split pushing, things like that. And because they did that, they were able to survive a little longer and maybe farm a little longer or, get lane or objectives or secure dragons or Baron buff or anything like that, causing, maybe that switch effect of them to actually take control over the game and secure that win. So other than that, I mean, yeah, he hit everything else pretty spot on.
Definitely. Yeah. So you can start to see that, the match results kind of tell a bigger story. And that's kind of what the next slide is here. We actually pulled from the last game of the season before this, supposed matchup between St. John's and DePaul was DePaul versus Villanova. And this was kind of more, a little bit more in-depth stats from that game. And that was just as simple as clicking more details on that individual match. And we can kind of pull up the full story without having to, sit and watch a 30-minute game. We can see, what items were bought at the end of the game, what the individual stats were, goal differential, how many objectives were cleared. And this is other tools that you can use in your scouting, especially for League of Legends, because, they have this data available for past games throughout the regular season. So, there's a couple of things highlighted. We keyed in on DePaul's ADC before as being a really strong point within their lineup. You can see that was definitely a determining factor in this win. He played really, really well. And the stats between Villinova and DePaul kind of show where, some of those big significant, differences between the teams are, whether it be in CS per minute, or, KDA across the board, amount of damage done. So, more stats available, as you go into the next level of just looking at the score, you can pull up individual performances and start to look at, who did what and how. Brock, Michael, anything to kind of add in here before we get to the last section of this analytics spine? Brock, you want to lead us off here?
I was kind of looking at it as you was talking here, and some different things, played out, like was Thresh, missing hooks. I look at, you've got Olaf and you've got Sett, two pretty tanky champions, and I don't see an Executioners. I don't see a Blade of the Rune King. And that's just something that at the high school level, we if you get somebody going up against tanky, you try to shred that with grievous wounds and things like that. So did that play a factor in it? Was their jungle able to come down there and pick on Sivir at the bot lane, and just tank through it, and then push their lane in and kind of cause their 3, maybe 4 deaths there. Also be able to push that lane in and then come swing up, take dragon, things like that. That all kind of plays out as I'm looking through the item picks, and not being able to see the video. You got to kind of guess, just with the stats. And that's a lot of things, a lot of times you don't have VODs from the other teams, especially at the high school level. So we've got to kind of look at the builds and kind of guess and kind of strategize. As we said, 3-4 slides ago, you kind of look at their picks and you start going, okay, what may have happened here? What can we do to, cause different outcomes than maybe this team did? So.
Yeah. A lot of this is pattern recognition over, hey, we're going to look at this game against Villanova, and we're going to look at the game, before that against another university. And throughout the course of a season, the more data that you have at your disposal, the better of a scouting report you can kind of put together. Michael, anything to kind of add on this slide before we kind of wrap things up on the analytics?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head in talking about sort of collecting data over time, because no one data point is enough to base any conclusions off of, right? Like just looking at this game result in a vacuum tells me nothing about either of these teams. One of these teams could be clearly better than the other, but they just made a couple of early mistakes and the other team snowballed well. Like a single game is not a large enough sample size to draw any conclusions necessarily. What I am seeing from this is that Azir and Ezreal Yumi are both relatively safe lanes. They got ahead early, I would be my guess, because they have a fair number of completed items and a QSS, kind of paying the tax against the Malzahar there. So I imagine Villanova was trying to play around this Malzahar a lot to sort of lock someone down and force a pick. It's going to be kind of hard and do an Olaf. And so what I would guess would happen, having not seen this game at all and having no other context, would be that, the Echo tried to get something going early, but he can't really gank mid, he can't really gank top. If he shows up top, Sett just slams the Echo and the Aatrox together and walks away and laughs. So I think this is just kind of a hard team to go on to if you're Villanova. It's hard to engage on this particular DePaul composition. But like I said, no way to really know. This game is a game of inches and seconds and milliseconds, and without seeing, this all could have come down to just one early game team fight. They maybe Villanova had good position around the first dragon, and then just someone had a brain fart and made a mistake, right? Because they're never going to execute perfectly. So very hard to tell in a vacuum. But other random stats you want to look at is CS per minute. right? So like the Ezreal had almost 10 CS per minute. He was like untouched. So if nothing else, that tells you like he is a very efficient player, and you need to either ban the Ezreal so he doesn't have a safe lane matchup to farm into, or intentionally counterpick an aggressive lane with a jungler that can dive them, maybe like a Shen in the top lane so you can just 4-man dive the bot lane. Like that's what I would take away from this, is that they play through bot, and if you give King Amazin the space to scale into the late game, then he's going to run away with it. So there are some ideas that you can get from looking at things like that, but only in the totality of all the data that we just covered can you make a sound enough conclusion that like this ought to be our game plan today.
Yep. And that kind of leads us into the back half of this presentation, where we're going to talk more about film and using VOD review so that you can kind of pair, the actual video of what happened along with kind of the story and the stats that come with it from the analytics side. So there's a lot that goes into kind of building out a good scouting report, or a good, self-reflection on what happens during a game. And it's all pieces to the puzzle. So, and kind of just the last little bit here with the idea of, hey, we saw these commonalities before. Maybe there's a pattern that we can exploit. Kind of already talked about, okay, Sett is probably going to get picked for DePaul. How are we going to counter that? Are we going to, use some of these champions? Or are we going to, make sure that the champions that Sett works well with don't get touched? And those kind of will build into your draft strategy. So, with that, we're going to run into the kind of the back half here for VOD review. So a couple of key things, why do we do them in the first place? What tools are recommended to actually running through the review? Michael's going to pull up a part of a video, and we're going to actually, go through and touch on things that you actually do during that session. And then kind of finally, what lessons do you learn from looking at film? So just, from a very high level, before we get nitty gritty in here, Brock, Michael, why do you do VOD reviews, and kind of with your experiences working with your student athletes, kind of what are the main focuses for you in pulling up game film?
Brock, you want to go first, or should
I can touch on it first. That's
Yeah,
fine. So my main outlook on it is, I've coached soccer for multiple years, and I've been involved in football and things like that. So traditional sports, we review film all the time. And it's basically with like a sport with soccer, there's so many outcomes, so many things that could happen. And you can tell an athlete, you can tell a student, you can still, tell an esports athlete, these things like you did this, you did it. But when you show them, it really clicks that way. So when you can do a VOD review and you can really give them a pinpoint of why their actions caused this reaction, even a positive or a negative way, it really breaks it down analytically of, hey, I actually did make an impact. My KDA might have been, 1, 5, and 7, whereas my AD carry was, double digits in the kill ratio, but it was because of my rotation through the map, or it was because of my split push or something like that caused that. So when you actually break it down, like that, and not all things are good too. You could really show them, hey, you really overextended here. You should have been setting up for dragon. I can go on and on, but that's one of the big reasons that I do it. And it's just like I've been taught, years and years with traditional sports. It's you show them that, and you can really get their brain wrapping around of how can I do better, and seeing that, you don't have to be, it's your fault, or things like that. You can go, hey, if you do this, I can do this. And you kind of start getting that critical thinking of it as a team whole, instead of having 5 different players or 6 different players, depending on if you're Overwatch or League. But that's one of the biggest reasons I do it. And, communications is key to all this. So.
Awesome. Michael?
Yeah, I think Brock touched on sort of the main point there, is helping players see things that they might not be aware of. And that's because as a player, they're not a neutral observer of their own performance, right? They are hyper-focused on executing and communicating, and this is all happening really quickly, and there's a bunch of stimuli coming at them, and it's really like, I've finished a game and just been like, what did I even do? Like, what just happened, right? And then even also the limitations of the game. If you think about traditional sports, Brock said he's a soccer coach. I can't see in 360 degrees, so I didn't see the entire game when I was playing in it. Especially if I'm on offense, like there might be a ton of things happening behind me that I didn't see at all. So, and same is true for these games. Like you can't look at all of the map at once, so you're limited to your individual perspective, and you're limited by sort of your own biases and understandings of the game. So that leads into sort of my next point that the main purpose to me of VOD review is helping players understand their own thought processes and the thought processes of their teammates, and through that they slowly build a consensus on how they want to play the game, because there are multiple styles and you might have to ask some of your players to play in a way that they normally would not because it's better for the team. And if you just say like, hey, I need you to be less aggressive here because the team is not with you, and the rest of the team is better if we play defensive, then you're just telling them to do something different and not giving them a reason, right? So you need to show them like, here are the actions and decisions you made, and they're not necessarily wrong. We're just not doing the best that we as 5 players could do. So VOD review for me is a process of building consensus. How do we think about the game? How do we want to play the game? And just as sort of an anecdote, I have 2 League of Legends teams. I have a top level kind of all Diamond Plus roster, and then we have a Gold roster. And they're both this fall participating in an amateur competition. One of the requirements is that you have to have played 100 solo queue games, and 2 of my guys have not. I have. So it's an amateur competition, so I'm sitting in with them for a week or 2 until the rest are eligible, so that they can compete. I wouldn't do this in a collegiate competition, obviously, because I can't. Actually, I could, because I'm a full-time student now. I'm a grad student now, but normally I would not. But I've actually really enjoyed it because it's allowed me to sort of see their perspective, and they're all relatively new to playing competitively. So having me as a voice in comms for their first couple games has been helpful to sort of model the types of things they should be doing. But there's a bunch of different sort of like general ideas about team play and strategy and things to do and not to do that I preach to my players all the time. And in one of the games that I played with them, I did probably everything that I tell my players not to do. And at the end of the game, I was just so upset and frustrated with myself. I was like, how could I do all of these things? And it's like, well, you have a split second to make a decision. And so it doesn't matter how many times we've talked about it. If I can't execute on it in the moment, and if my teammates aren't there to be like, no, remember we decided to do this. Like, no one shot caller or no one performer is going to be at their best and executing perfectly at all times. So if you put in the time in VOD review to build that consensus, then everyone starts to look out for each other and becomes like a collective conscience for the team, where someone's like getting a little too excited or ahead of themselves, and they're like, we can go, we can fight here, we can fight here. And then someone goes, no, remember what coach said? Like, don't overextend, back, buy, constrict, and spend your gold and get out on the map and maintain your tempo advantage. And so in the heat of the moment, if you've gone through this multiple times, and this is something I was going to touch on later, but sort of, I'm sure many of you are teachers, you can't just get in front of the class and say like, Declaration of Independence was in 1776 and never say it again and expect them to remember it. Like, you have to repeat things over and over again until it builds up and becomes ingrained in their subconscious, right? So that is the purpose of VOD review for me, is to build up sort of that collective understanding of how do we play this game.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the key things when you're doing VOD review is to focus in on positives and negatives, showing equal time to the things that you did right. And then you can kind of reiterate that and say, this is a good thing that we need to continue to do. And then these are areas that we need to, work on a little bit more, or that might have gone wrong. And those are kind of, really key instances of like these guys are talking about, learning from and teaching players to understand better and kind of recognize those successes and those failures. So, moving into kind of the tools section of this, just the different platforms and software and extra tools in your tool belt that you guys use when you do VOD review. I'd love to kind of hear from you guys. And then Michael, whenever you need to take screen control, just feel free to let me know.
Yeah, Brock, if you want to touch on kind of the things you use first, and then I'll talk and can bring up my screen share while I do that.
Yeah, I don't use any major programs or software. Use typical, like I said, with reviewing comms with Discord. The good thing with like League of Legends, you can get in there and it records the matches. You can pull it. We'll stream. I'll get in, especially with like scrims, and we'll stream them. But a lot of times we'll record them, and then I'll download them, and we can kind of walk them through step by step. If you ever look at like proguides.com and you go on there and you actually sign up, whenever someone purchases a pro session, they'll sit down and play a game with a pro player, or they'll send them a VOD pretty much, and they'll kind of walk them through it and draw on there and kind of, analyze every move that they make and what they should be doing and why they shouldn't be doing this. And that's kind of what we do. We break it down step by step per lane. We try to take, video from top lane, so many games, and we kind of look at their habits and break it down. And back kind of what we was talking about with why we do the VOD reviews is this gives you a major tool of really making the players think. As far as the high school level goes, for sure, you can go, hey, what could you have done better here? Instead of you going, you shouldn't have done this. You can go, what should you have done? What do you think you should have done? And then they start thinking, well, okay, I could have done this. And they could have 3-4 right answers that I wasn't even thinking about, and you'd be like, yeah. And then you kind of start playing out the scenarios and things like that. So we just use the basic stuff, a lot of streaming, Twitch, recording, and I use like OBS, Streamlabs, and stuff like that to kind of go back and between that and some other software, just kind of break it down and cut different pieces of footage and showing. And like you said, show the highlights of the good and the bad, and really get them critically thinking. But don't use anything major. I'm kind of interested to see what he actually uses, because I might have to look into it. So.
Yeah, definitely. One of you can kind of make this as high tech or as bare bones as you want. Esports has a lot of flexibility in it, just in general. One of the really easy things that you can do for like an Overwatch game that doesn't have your baked in replay like League of Legends does, I would just open up the Microsoft game bar on a computer and just hit Windows G, and then it'll open up a tray that you can actually just hit record your screen and record audio. And then, just like Brock said, we would have Discord going in the background that, that audio would get captured. At the end of the game, you stop the recording, download it, and then we would pull over, in our film room, which is just a projector set up in a classroom right next door to our facility. We would pull up the game and then be able to hear back the comms and then see kind of that spectator view that you might have from, one player's perspective, or if you have a additional, coach or observer that has multiple angles that you can kind of look through the whole game, switching perspectives and kind of going through positioning and all of those different, angles from the different players. Because one thing that, if Brock and I and Michael are all on a team, I might see something from my perspective that my teammates don't. So having those multiple camera angles is really a benefit for especially a game like Overwatch, where it's not one static camera from up above. Michael, let's kind of dive into some of the stuff that you are using for tools for your VOD reviews.
Yeah, so you touched on a lot of good things there. Obviously, you need a means of recording your screen. You can do that with Streamlabs. You can do that with OBS. You can do that with the game bar thing, Windows G. Your video card probably has some kind of software that allows you to capture as well. The important thing to keep in mind is like, what part of the game are you trying to see? So let's say if you're a high school coach and all you have is sort of like a couple hours with the team a week, you watch a game, you are planning to do VOD review immediately afterwards. For League of Legends, you can just have one of the players pull up the replay right there. And that's the best solution, because you have time controls and you can turn settings on and off. So in the spectator client, you can see like vision from our perspective or their perspective, and you can move the camera around so you can see wherever, whenever, and that's the best scenario. Problem with that is you might not always have time to immediately do a VOD review, or maybe you want to do some preparation before said VOD review. Maybe it was a really rough game and everyone left kind of hot-headed. Now is not the best time to start the review. Let's do it tomorrow. The downside to that is, at least in League of Legends, every time the game patches, all of the previous replay files break. So replays are saved as like a .roffle file, .rofl, which is like a proprietary thing. It's not even a video file. It's just a set of instructions that it gives to the game to sort of reenact all of the inputs from all of the champions. So there is a way to also record within the game. It gets kind of buggy if you try and record the whole game, because it's really just meant to like record a quick highlight when you're looking at a replay. Those save as a .webm file, which is an easy to use file and is sort of like optimized for HTML5 and viewing online. But you might need to convert that into another file if you want to do sort of the next step, which is have the whole game and the team's comms in sync. See, there's the problem, right? I want to be able to see the spectator view, not just limited to one person's view, but I also want the team's comms. But League of Legends has a built-in 3-minute spectator delay. So how do I go around that? Last year, what I did, and I haven't done it as much this year because it's just too time consuming, I picked specific games where I felt like one of the big issues was our comms. So I'm going to go back and edit it all together for this specific game. But what I would do is I would, while they were playing the game, I'd be in the spectator client. 3 minutes after the game starts, the spectator client starts up. I would use the client to record the file. In hindsight, I should have just been screen grabbing it because I then had to take the WebM file and convert it to a .mp4 so that I could then bring it into a video editing software. And then I would bring in the audio files of the team's comms, which I captured using a Discord bot called Craig, which you can add to your server, and then you add it to a particular voice channel, and it will record all of the audio from everyone in that call. And then it gives you a link. You can go to the website and download it. What's pretty fancy about that is that you can either download a single pre-mixed audio file of everything together, or you can download individual stems of people's, like this particular person's audio and so on and so forth. That's pretty handy if you're trying to do like some cool media project stuff. So if you have as part of your team like a media content production team, then you can do kind of like the what do you call them, like the mic check style videos that they put out for the professional game where you can get a glimpse behind the scenes and hear the teams communicating. That's really handy because then you can edit each one individually, and maybe one person's mic didn't sound as good as another, so you could do some audio editing. That's a bit off the deep end, but if you wanted to do that media stuff, those are tools available to you. So I would take the condensed Craig audio file, lay it on top of the recording of the game so that we have a top-down view from the spectator perspective, still limited to like wherever the camera was at the time when I was spectating. So I don't have the full control of going into the client itself and moving the camera around, so that they can rewatch the game, what happened and what they were saying. And that I found has been the most illuminating for them in VOD review, to help make their comms more efficient, or to hear themselves. They just go, oh man, is that what I said? Because they don't always say exactly what they mean because they're just processing so much stuff at once. It's hard to form a cogent thought while you're also microing and paying attention to 15 different things on every corner of the screen. So that is the long-winded explanation of like sort of the most advanced thing you can do to get everything all in one. The easier thing to do would just be have a player record their perspective. And if they're in a Discord call, then they'll also get the audio of everyone talking. And that's the easiest way to just get the whole game. If you're going to do that, I'd have either your jungler or your support be the one that you record for League of Legends anyway. In Overwatch, I would do like your off support, like if you have an Ana or someone who's going to be at the back of the fight the whole time and is going to see the most of the field. In League, if your jungler is like a late game farmer who's just going to be autoing camps the whole time, then maybe you want it to be your support, especially if they're going to roam a lot. It kind of depends on the game, but generally I'll have my jungler record his perspective, and then what I'll do, what I did last year is we would all just sit together around a monitor and I would scrub through it and I would go, here, look at this. This year, because of COVID-19 and also because I found this product, and they have been very gracious in letting us use it for free until they officially launch it. And I'm going to do my best to not just make this a product demo, because you could do the same things in any other piece of software. I just want to show off like the asynchronous sort of commenting thing, because that's really nice and it has some other basic features that would be helpful. You could do a similar thing here with a piece of software like Epic Pen, something that allows you to draw on the screen. But this just kind of brings that all into one. So I'm going to share my screen. You cannot start screen share while the other participant is sharing. So I think we have to trade off. Cool. And then I'm going to, yeah, I'm not going to do my whole screen. I'm just going to do this window. Cool. So can everyone see this? I'm in Insights.
Yep.
Cool. So this is Insights.gg. It's a platform. I think they have like a freemium model, so you can get access to sort of the basic features without paying for it. So what I do is after the game, I will upload the VOD file to YouTube as an unlisted file, so other people can't find it. I don't think it can be private to work with this, but either way, that could be another thing you do. You could do sort of asynchronous VOD review with whatever software you have, right? You just like create a shared Google Doc with a link to the video and you write in timestamps. And so you could do this asynchronously without a piece of software like this. But this is pretty handy for some other reasons. So as an example, what's the one that I did comment on already? This one. So on 9-5, we played Indiana Tech. This was, I recorded from the spectator's perspective on my machine using Streamlabs, hence like our logo overlay. That's just like what I had set up for when we stream our games. And you'll notice that here in the right bar, I can make comments and they're keyed to particular timestamps. So I can go to this, right? And it'll zoom forward there. We're the red team. Can you guys hear this as well?
No.
Okay, I don't think you'll need to because I think this is just game audio, so the audio doesn't matter. But so yeah, that was just sort of laziness. We came out into a 5-point. We should have either had a ward in the river here or been positioned better to see that invade incoming, and we weren't. So I made a comment about that. So I just go to a particular timestamp, type in a comment. Some other handy things is that on any of these frames, I can draw on the screen. So for example, here, what did I say? I said, good response to move into the opposite side and ward their start. And then I put a little red circle to show what I mean. I'm talking about our two people here who, in response to being invaded on one side of the map, and they know that everyone is over here, we went into their jungle, and I think we just go in and place a ward or something to spot their start. And that gives us a lot of information that we have to work with. So in terms of tools, this is a big one I use, and it's been really helpful this year in particular because like I said, we can do this asynchronously. And no one did on this one because this was like the first one I did as a test. But another user could come in here and click reply, and then they can like @ me, and we can have an extended conversation back and forth over a couple days, talking about sort of the finer points of the game, and then we have this forever. One kind of last feature, not to make it a sales demo, but why I like this platform in particular is because on any of these pages, I can put in stickers based on the game. So I can be like, you know, Mundo should have been here or whatever, right? Like I can move this around. I can also on any frame input a map. So it has like top-down views of every map in Overwatch. So you can draw and talk about kind of specific tactics. I think it also has like all of Summoner's Rift. League of Legends. Yeah, I can put like all of Summoner's Rift on and say what we should have done and draw a bunch of arrows, and you can really get into the X's and O's. So that is what I wanted to share about kind of tools I use. Josh, did you want to set up sort of another question, or should I just hop right into kind of what I do in a VOD review?
I think we can just keep rolling in, you know, in the interest of time here. We're at almost 8 o'clock already. So I think if you want to just kind of highlight more, and Brock, if you have any things to add, you know, please feel free to jump in. We had a question come through from Luis again. Does this platform have Rocket League? Do you know?
It does, yeah. So in terms of like these features, like you can throw in a Rocket League map. But the cool thing about it is like this isn't even necessarily video game specific. You can upload videos on the free version. You can only upload like video links. The paid version allows you to browse a file on your machine, so it'll just save you a step. But I mean, I could upload any video I wanted. I could use this to VOD review for football. I could bring in video and draw on it. All the same things. It's game agnostic.
Awesome.
Yeah. So into some specifics about sort of like what I do in a VOD review and the actual day-to-day of it. The first thing I'll do is I will view it ahead of time. So either I'm making notes while they're playing, and I'll make specific timestamp notes. So, you know, we're 5 minutes, 30 seconds into the game and they do something boneheaded. I'll go 5:30, should have done this. Just so I have something to then go back and reference. And then I'll watch it again if I have the time, ideally, and maybe even a second time, just to verify that like my gut reaction analysis was correct before I go to them and say, you should have done this. And they go, but coach, what about this? You didn't take that into account. And then I go, haha, you're right. I'm dumb. you caught that. But to that point, VOD review is not the time for me to just be like, you should have done this, here's all the mistakes you made. That's a big part of it. But what I want to do is inspire a dialogue. And I am very clear with my team. It's like, I do not have all the answers. I'm not here necessarily to tell you like how you should have better clicked the mouse. Because a lot of the most glaring mistakes that they make, they will be very apparent, like it will be apparent to them. It will be very obvious. They will know. Oftentimes in comms, I will hear them verbalizing their frustration with their own mistake as they're making it. They'll just be like, I did a dumb thing. I'm dead. Sorry, guys, right? So like the obvious things, are obvious. What they don't see is sort of the chain of cause and effect that led to that game state. So oftentimes, especially in League of Legends, someone will be like, man, that was so garbage. This champion is busted. They were just able to kill me like that. What am I supposed to do there? And my answer is often not be there. They don't see that as sort of an option. They're just like, what better could I have done to outplay him here or to win this fight? And the answer is you shouldn't have taken the fight because you ended up in a vulnerable position because of these decisions that you made 1 or 2 minutes ago. Especially in a game like League of Legends, it's all about kind of like tempo. The simple way that my friend and I joke around in explaining League of Legends is that you want to do more things more often than the other team, right? Like you want to exert more pressure, show up to more fights, press more buttons, put out more damage. And the way to do that is to think about how you ended up in any given scenario rather than just going purely results based. It's like, oh, see how you died in this fight? You should have flashed out. Like, okay, I knew that. I know that, like, and in most scenarios I would have done that. I just made a mistake this time. And that's the thing that separates an average competitive player from a professional. Very rarely when I'm watching professional League of Legends will I see someone that does something that it's just like, I am incapable of doing that. There's no way that I could have pressed those buttons in that sequence and accomplished that thing. It's not so much that, it's just that they do that every time. And for me, that would be like a moment of brilliance, and I would jump out of my seat and be like, oh, look at this crazy play I just made. And that's there every day, right? So it's not so much that they are superhuman and do things that other players cannot. It's that they do it consistently. So I'm tangenting here a little bit. What were my other kind of major points? So what do I look for in a VOD review? I kind of touched on one of the first things, which is like thinking about how they ended up in any given scenario. The chain of events that led to that. It's like, well, you were a little bit too far out of lane in that in the first couple minutes, and so you got ganked and you had to flash away. So you didn't have your flash for this next fight, which means you died. And because you were off the map, they were able to take the dragon. And then because they got the first dragon, they were ahead and got the second dragon. And so like any sort of mistake can be traced back to a bunch of different things. The analogy I like to make, and I think our co-presenter here will appreciate it, having been a soccer coach, is like, if your team allows a goal in soccer, you don't blame the goalie. There were 10 other people that made mistakes on your team before it came down to the goalie to have to save the shot, right? So it's easy to get too narrow focused and sort of results based and say, oh, we lost the fight because so-and-so got picked at the Baron right at the start. And it's like, well, there were a bunch of other mistakes that you made prior to that that led to that exact scenario that put you behind, if that makes sense. Without a specific example, I'm getting a little amorphous here, but that's the kind of thought processes that we're looking for. Another thing to look for is their communications. So very rarely, but occasionally, we will do a VOD review where all we do is listen to our comms. We don't watch anything. We just listen to what we're saying, and that allows them to focus entirely on it, because it's often overlooked, right? They're so focused on clicking the buttons that they don't think about what they're saying. I'm watching my team play a scrim set right now, and they were really far ahead in the first game, and they picked a fight that looked good, but they lost it because they didn't communicate. And one of my players was really frustrated because they said, hey guys, I heard the sound of ultimates going off before any of you said anything, right? And it seems kind of overkill at first when you get your teams to start doing this, but like they should communicate everything they do, everything they're thinking, everything they could do, because you can always afterwards in VOD review go, this is a little excessive, like you don't need to communicate that as much, or you've gotten on the same page about that, so you don't have to be so specific. But especially early on, everything. I can do this. I have this resource. So-and-so is roaming. I need to back up. Can you help me? I think we can fight here. All of it. You need to communicate everything and just get into the habit of calling things out. And it's not even, some players have a hard time with that because they're like, oh, there's just so much going on. I don't know what to focus on. I don't know what decision we should make. The important thing about communications is you shouldn't just be saying what you want to happen, like the end result, right? You don't have to only calm when you have an idea of what should be done. We should do this, right? You can communicate just basic facts about the game because you shouldn't assume, even if it's really obvious, you shouldn't assume that everyone on your team is seeing everything that you're seeing, right? So like we're in a team fight. It's pretty obvious that like someone is walking right at us. We all see it. Anyone with eyes would probably see it. Still, communicate it, because you don't know. Maybe someone's focusing on something else on the other side of the screen, and it's in that split second that they get jumped on, right? So everything, so-and-so's coming at us, right? Calm everything and create like a steady stream of chatter, just throwing out kind of facts about the game. So-and-so is here, his flash is down, et cetera, et cetera. And then your natural leaders and your shot callers will synthesize all of that information on the fly. And that gets down to a very granular detail, especially with League and Overwatch. Like, let's say you're Morgana, you should be communicating your bind cooldown. If you just threw your Q, you need to tell the team if they're trying to start a fight, no Q, no Q. I have Q in 3, 2. Okay, I'm queuing. Yeah, this guy, right? It can get that specific. So when we're analyzing our communication, I will often play it out, especially if there's a particular section where I'm like, hey, I think you guys made a mistake here. I won't frame it in any way. I'll just play it. And then I'll ask an open-ended question that forces them to think and engage with it, to think critically. I'll say, like, what happened here? And very quickly, someone will jump in and be like, oh, I was thinking this, I wanted to do this, but I didn't say it. Or someone else will go, that's a great idea. I would have followed you, but I didn't understand your plan or your thought process, or I didn't have the information that I needed to know that I could do that, right? Like, I thought if I went in, the Annie was just gonna flash Tibbers me. And then the other person goes, oh, well, she didn't have flash, right? That is known information that we had. We tracked her summoner when she flashed 3 minutes ago. Someone just forgot to remind it. So even things that seem obvious, and we can get really nitty gritty on like what you should be calming at what time. That's not necessarily what this is about, but like that is a specific example to show the general things that I'm looking for. To my earlier point of like helping them think about their thinking, that sort of metacognition. And understanding each other's thought processes. You'll often find that some of your players were like, oh, I didn't even know that was an option. Especially if they're new to a game like League of Legends or Overwatch, they'll play it like Call of Duty. They'll just see a champion and fight that champion. And it's like, we don't have to fight them, right? Like, we could have just not and went to the dragon and taken that for free instead. Or we could have just waited because there was a wave of super minions on the opposite side of the map. So instead of forcing the fight, what if we just kept our pressure there and let our split pusher push and put them in a fork? Whatever it is, right? It's in VOD review that those lines reveal themselves. And then the final step, and the last thing I'll leave you with before I stop talking so much, is like, okay, we've identified a bunch of things we need to fix for next time. Now what do we do, right? To my point earlier of like, you can't just say it once and expect everyone to remember, oh yeah, we talked about this 2 weeks ago in VOD review. Like, you have to turn it into something actionable and make it kind of like a mantra. So in my team, one of our mantras is back by constrict. You win a big fight. If there's not something immediately to take on the map, don't overextend. Don't spend another 30 seconds trying to chase someone down to get a little bit more gold. You should back, spend that gold, get back out onto the map, and keep the pressure up. It doesn't seem immediately intuitive because you want to just like keep your foot on the gas, but a lot of the time that's the best and least risky option you can take to close out the game. And so it was after just like weeks and weeks of them continuing to make that same mistake and me continuing to point it out in VOD review that I was just like, we need language because your words matter, right? So I came up with back by constrict, which has an acronym that stuck in their minds. Not to get too blue here, but you get my point. Like, whatever it is, if it's a mnemonic device or a mantra, or even just like something that you write on the board and you make everyone say it before they get into a game, or you put it on a sticky note and have them put it on their monitor, so it's just like always there in their mind, because they'll agree that like this is a thing I need to do differently. They just won't remember because you get into autopilot mode and you just do the things that you've always done. You have to break that bad habit, so you have to constantly remind them through mantras or active recall, or you can have them journal. I think that's really helpful, especially for newer gamers. Like, in their VOD review, you should be having them take notes and then give them 2 to 3 key takeaways. Like, what are the things that I need to do differently next time? I'm going to write them down. Every time I sit down to practice, I'm going to look at those and think about it for a minute and remind myself of that. And then the coach is always going to be in my ear going, remember, back by constrict, remember, do these things, until it becomes a habit.
Awesome.
That was a lot there. Sorry.
Yeah, no, all really good information, and kind of the reason why we built out these webinars is to share that really high level thinking. Brock, when you guys are doing VOD for your high school team, what are some of the things that you're looking for? How do you go about that process?
I mean, like he was talking about at the beginning, really analyzing the VOD ahead of time and going through and making those notes at those marks of the, minute to second ratio of what am I seeing? What could we have done better there? And yeah, in some cases the student is going to go, hey, well, we did this because of this, and it could be correct and it could be something we missed. But watching it as a spectator, you really analyze that, and you can really break it down versus maybe going right after a match and going, oh, see, you did this. So see this. You can really step back there and kind of write down your notes and make sure you thoroughly review the VOD to kind of give those tools to them and that critical thinking to them to really get them to start going, back by constrict. Why didn't I back by constrict? And coach has told me to do that many, many times. I remember it now just listening to him say it, multiple times. Like, I got to back by and constrict next time I play league, So, and I love the analogy earlier because, man, in a soccer match, yeah, was the goalie's fault. What did you do? Why'd you miss that? No, where was the breakdown that started that chain reaction? That's the same thing with something like this. Why did this happen? Why did your bottom lane get ganked? Hey, mid lane, you didn't call out. Jungle walked right through your lane. You did not ping that. He was going down bot river. You did not let him know. Guess what happened? They got ganked. So where's that breakdown? You can't just blame it on someone else. And you got to kind of, highlight that and really show them. So yeah, making notes is huge. And like I said earlier, really ask them questions versus going, hey, you did this wrong. And I'm kind of bad about that sometimes because, I want to really just get them to do better, but I got to step back and go, hey, think what could you have done better? So yeah, I mean, just so many key points that he touched, and it's all great stuff. So I think a lot of those different things we try to analyze, and now we're going to back by and constrict for sure though. So, but
Well, you
yeah,
see what I
that's
mean,
all.
though? Like
Oh,
it's
absolutely. Yeah.
over time, you will start to build up kind of a checklist of like all the things that
Mm-hmm.
we want to do. Especially like, with my player, with my diamond team, I don't have to remind them to like ping missing that often. And if they don't do it, it's just because they had a lapse. And going over that and review and really harping on that, like, remember, you got to tell your team that so and so is missing. Like that's already in there. But for our newer team, that might be a brand new concept to them. So you have to
Mm-hmm.
start small. You don't begin with sort of the high level macro rotation strategy. And especially if you're working with younger or newer, more inexperienced gamers, they're going to make a lot of mistakes. So focus on the most easy to fix, actionable things because they can't apply 10 different lessons from the VOD review in their next scrim set. So that's why I really focused on making it actionable, trying to keep it to no more than 2 or 3 things, or if there were multiple mistakes that they made that all kind of fell into the same category, create a larger mantra for that to just remind them how to think about the game. And over time, you'll build up sort of a checklist of like, okay, remember when we leave the base, we need to fan out into like a line of scrimmage defensive formation so that we can spot them coming in. And then when I go to lane, I need to make sure that I'm telling people when my laner leaves or if they're off the map or if they based. And we also need to track the jungler, and we also need to ward the river, and we also, and that'll build up over time, and you'll eventually have this sort of long checklist of things you need to do.
Awesome.
Yeah, ultimately, you're just really turning action into reaction, and that's anything in life,
Oh, I
make
love
good
that.
habits, and that's what we tell with muscle memory with soccer. And I'm using soccer a lot, but, basically because it's part of my world. But yeah, you show somebody how to kick a ball correctly, or you show somebody how to lane correctly, or back by constrict. Exactly. Muscle memory, change your action into reaction. Then, like you said, your high elo players, you don't have to harp on them to do that. They already know they're doing it. And a lot of times they don't even remember they're doing it, and they just, go and do fan out, go get vision, return to lane like you was talking about. So yeah, if you kind of get that in with those younger, and I deal with a lot of, newer gamers and things, especially as esports grows in a high school setting, more and more, we're really trying to pull in those avid gamers and go, okay, you can play solo queue. That's great, but let's play as a team now. And then you kind of create those concepts, and you still got to tell them, you got to do this, you got to get vision, you got to communicate, so I love all the stuff, that you're talking about there. And I can't agree anymore.
Thanks, Brock. I really appreciate that. I have one quick example to show this all in practice, if that's okay, because I did tell Josh that I was going to actually go through a VOD, but I mean, we'd be here for hours. But a very quick
let's just
example.
go through one real quick example, and then we'll kind of wrap things up with any additional Q&A. So,
Cool.
For everybody that's still watching live, now's a great time to throw those questions in the chat. We'll watch this real quick and then kind of wrap up.
Awesome. So here we're red team. We have Senna and Sivir. We have been pressuring them a lot. We're at their tower here, but they're into a Nautilus. So they got a little ahead of themselves. And the comment I made here is that this is disrespectful. You should know better. The Nautilus Q can't hit you if there's a thing in between you, like your minions. So if you stay in this box behind your minions, then he won't be able to hit you. So that's like a little micro thing. And this is the type of mistakes that I'm talking about where like he knew immediately when he made that mistake. So this in a vacuum is like, yeah, I made that mistake. I won't make it next time. Like it was just a lapse in judgment, right? But that's not where it ends, right? So this is 3 minutes, 5 seconds. So let's just watch this through. This is so loud on my side. So he gets taken really low here. He has to flash, but he survives. So that in and of itself is very bad, but he knows that why it's bad. He just mispositioned. He did a dumb thing. This is another random comment about that. Then we're back here, right? He died there because of the mistake he made 20 seconds before. And this is another instance of disrespect. He knows he doesn't have flash. He knows that he's down in health. He now has to change the way that he plays this laning phase out. So he might be tempted to think, once again, results-based analysis, like, oh, I should have just like not gotten hit by it. I should have been better and moved out of the way. But this speaks to the point I made about how like chain reaction of things, the correct thing to have done would have been to not be here. It would have been be 200 units back and farther down the lane so that there is no world where he can Q you. And he wouldn't have even been able to do this and kill you had you not made this earlier mistake, right? And so that's just one small example, and that trend might continue through the rest of the game, right? Maybe he dies here, and then he comes back to lane without flash, and he's down in gold, so he has to play even safer, and then they lose the first dragon, and then it snowballs from there, right? So anytime if there's contention and everyone's looking at like a particular point in the game, this was the deciding moment where we lost the game. You go, well, is it? How did you end up here in the first place? Because chances are there were 5 to 10 smaller mistakes that led to that game state. And you're just looking at it as, oh, I should have just executed better in the moment. And it's like, well, had you made the correct decision 10 times prior to this, you would have already won the game. You wouldn't have even been in this position. So that's the harder trends to see long-term. But those are the things that I'm looking for generally.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Michael and Brock, for sharing your knowledge and being a part of our discussion tonight. I don't think we had any real questions come through, so I think this is a great just time for you to say thank you once again. And if you have anything else to add here at the end, we'd love your closing thoughts.
I mean, I really appreciate you guys having me on here. I'm always willing to talk about anything esports. I think it's a great thing for these students. And as I mentioned earlier, as it grows through, state of Illinois, we're talking IHSA may sanction it as an actual sport for these kids. You're talking more scholarship opportunities, regional, more recognition throughout the communities. I'm from a small town, Southern Illinois, and whenever I kind of pitched this to, my principal at the time, superintendent now, I think it took me 4 or 5 years to wear him down before he finally said, okay, we'll do this. And we exploded. I mean, we went from like 8 players for that first year, just a trial run, to now we're upwards of over 100 students involved in this. And now that is club and participation, like, competition side as well. We're expanding out doing IHSEA and Playverse and things like that, and kind of feeling out for everything. And we're now starting to open channels with colleges and kind of finding what play level that we need to get these kids some some education money. And then actually I presented on why we should have this in our classroom. And if you ever want to look it up, NASEF has a curriculum 9 through 12 as the high school level. You can really dig into that. And I really would like to have that an opportunity as a trade skill, as gaming concepts and things, because I'm not going, hey, you're going to be a pro gamer. I'm not going to tell that to an athlete. You're going to be a pro soccer player, a pro football player. The chances of that are low for everybody. But you could take your passion of music and create gaming music, or you could take your passion of design and create jerseys and things with, with our logos and stuff like that on. So just, you got to look at the bigger picture and go, hey, there's actually a salary out there for people shoutcasting and, just observing the game and finding and following the action and things. And when you bring that to light to a lot of people that are kind of looking at it as you're playing video games, get that, that kind of, cliche look on it. When you go, hey, your kid could go and make a, 3-figure salary a year doing coding on a game, or go shoutcasting on a passion, or make video game music, or, and really produce his own line of music that could, really take him to that other level. So I think just, it's all good. I just think we just got to keep, getting the information out there, and I'm glad to do anything like this and help out in any way.
Everything Brock just said, that was all incredible. I don't want to step on any of that because he hit the nail on the head. This is a great opportunity for students to learn professional skills, teamwork, communication, coordination. Not everyone can be on the soccer team, but anyone can be on the esports team, and that's why I'm passionate about it. Thank you for having me, Josh. I really appreciate it. I hope that our attendees and the people watching later on took something away from this, and that I didn't go too deep or too abstract. And if you ever have any more questions, or you want to follow up or connect, feel free to reach out to me on Discord. I'm Coach Jones, #1919, or Twitter, Coach Archon. I'm sure Josh can connect you. And yeah, thank you so much for being here. I loved this opportunity. Glad to help.
Yeah, thank you so much, Brock and Michael, for being a part of it. It was great to have your perspectives and your knowledge. And for those of you who weren't able to watch all of us live, we'll have the recording sent out at the end of this week, and we'll have the YouTube video up. Watch for the Bytespeed socials. We'll connect everybody on Twitter and through email. So thanks, everybody. Next month, we're going to talk all about recruiting and getting your students ready for college and what that process will entail. So we'll have a great lineup of panelists again at the last Wednesday of the month. So thanks again, and we'll see you in October.